He grew up in a house with no electricity, no running water, and no father. He never took a single golf lesson in his life. Every coach who watched him swing said the move was wrong. And yet this man beat the greatest player who ever lived head-to-head with a national championship on the line, more than once. So how does a barefoot kid from a hayfield outside Dallas end up with 6 major championships and a place among the immortals of the game? Here's the full story. To understand Lee Trevino, you have to start with the dirt. He was born in 1939 in Dallas, Texas, into a level of poverty most people watching this could not picture. The house had no plumbing and no electricity. His father was gone before he could remember him. He was raised by his mother and his grandfather, a Mexican immigrant who dug graves for a living. The little farmhouse sat in the middle of a hayfield, and just over the fence from that field was the 7th fairway of the Glen Lakes Country Club. That fence was the most important thing in Lee Trevino's life. He started slipping onto the course as a boy, fishing balls out of the ditches and hitting them in the fading light with a battered hand-me-down club. By 8, he was caddying. By 14, he had dropped out of school for good to work at a driving range, picking the range, cleaning clubs, and hitting thousands upon thousands of balls in whatever daylight was left. He had no instructor, he had no swing theory, he had repetition, a fence, and a reason to keep going. Then at 17, he joined the Marine Corps, and golf turned serious in the strangest way possible. Stationed overseas, Trevino played his way onto the Marine golf teams and discovered the thing that would shape the rest of his life. He could beat people for money. And money, when you have grown up with absolutely none, sharpens the mind like nothing else on earth. When Trevino came home, he didn't head to qualifying school. He went hustling. There was a course in Dallas called Tennyson Park, a public track that became something close to legend in golf gambling circles. This is where Trevino built the edge that no driving range could ever give him. The story everyone repeats, because it's true, is that Trevino would offer to play opponents using nothing but a taped-up Dr. Pepper bottle instead of clubs. He'd toss the ball, strike it with the bottle, and chip and putt his way around for serious cash. And he won, constantly. Here's what people miss about those years. He wasn't just taking strangers' money. He was building a nervous system. Every putt at Tennyson Park had a price tag on it. By the time Trevino reached the PGA Tour, he had already stood over more genuine pressure shots than most professionals face in a decade, and he had done it back when losing meant he didn't eat. There is one hustling story that matters more than all the rest, because of who was on the other side of it. In the mid-1960s, Trevino was working at a little club called Horizon Hills, out near El Paso. The local gamblers wanted action, so they brought in a young, rising PGA Tour star named Raymond Floyd to come and clean out the unknown Mexican kid. When Floyd pulled up, the kid who came out to carry his bag and shine his shoes was Lee Trevino. Floyd assumed he was just the help. Then they teed it up. Trevino beat him the first day. He beat him again the second day. Floyd barely escaped with a win on the third day and left town genuinely shaken, reportedly telling people that he could beat the guys on tour, but he wasn't sure he could keep beating this guy. A future Hall of Famer had just looked into the eyes of a club worker and seen something he couldn't handle. And then there was the swing. Every coach who has ever lived would tell you Lee Trevino's swing was a disaster waiting to happen. He set up aiming well left of the target, with an open stance, dragged the club back low and outside, and looped it in a flat, lashing motion that looked like a man trying to swat a fly off a tabletop. By every textbook in golf, that move should have produced a wild, uncontrollable slice that ruined him. Instead, it produced the single most reliable shot in professional golf, a low, boring fade that started left and drifted gently back to the target, and that almost never, ever curved the wrong way. Trevino had engineered out the one shot that destroys careers. He physically could not hit a hook, and he explained it in the line golfers have been quoting for 50 years. You can talk to a fade, but a hook won't listen. He didn't fight his weakness, he built a fortress around it. And in the wind, where lesser players' shots ballooned and spun out of control, Trevino's flat, penetrating ball flight made him close to untouchable. Other professionals, the very best of his era, would come to regard him as one of the purest ball strikers the game had ever produced. In 1968, the world finally found out. At the US Open at Oak Hill, this unknown Mexican-American with the funny swing and the loud mouth did something that had never been done in the history of the championship. He shot all 4 rounds in the 60s, the first man ever to do it at a U.S. Open, and he won, finishing 4 shots clear of none other than Jack Nicklaus. Just like that, the hustler from Tennyson Park was a major champion. But 1968 was only the warning shot. 1971 is when Lee Trevino did something that, in modern golf, is essentially impossible. In the span of roughly 20 days, Trevino won 3 national championships on 2 continents. He won the US Open, then he flew north and won the Canadian Open. Then he flew across the Atlantic and won the Open Championship. 3 of the biggest titles in the sport, in under a month, against the best players alive. There is no modern comparison, none. The closest thing today's game has ever seen doesn't come within a country mile of it. And that US Open is where the legend of Lee Trevino collided with the one name that defined his entire era, Jack Nicklaus. Trevino and Nicklaus finished tied at Merion, forcing an 18-hole playoff for the US Open. And on the first tee in front of the gallery, with the biggest title in American golf on the line, Lee Trevino reached into his bag, pulled out a rubber snake, and tossed it at Jack Nicklaus's feet. Think about the nerve that takes. The most feared player on the planet is standing across from you. The entire sport is watching, and you decide the right move is a practical joke. But that was the whole point. That was the armor. Trevino used noise and laughter the way Tiger Woods would later use silence. He talked constantly, he joked constantly, and underneath all of it, he was an assassin. He beat Nicklaus in that playoff and took the US Open. And he did it again. The very next year, at Muirfield, Trevino stood directly between Jack Nicklaus and the Grand Slam. Nicklaus had already won the Masters and the US Open that season. The Open Championship was the 3rd leg. Trevino, holing chip after improbable chip down the stretch, won it, and denied Nicklaus golf's holy grail. Understand what that means. In an era utterly dominated by the Golden Bear, the one man who kept walking into the biggest moments and walking out with the trophy was a self-taught hustler who'd learned the game with a soda bottle in a public park. If you're enjoying this, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because the next chapter of Trevino's story is the one almost nobody tells. In 1975, at the Western Open outside Chicago, Lee Trevino was resting on the ground beside a lake during a rain delay when lightning struck. It hit him. It nearly killed him. The bolt threw him, disrupted his heart, and burned him. And it struck 2 other professionals nearby in the same storm. Trevino survived, but the man who walked off that course was never quite the same physical machine again. The strike caused severe damage to his back, damage that required surgery and that would torment him for the rest of his career. The free, repeating, bulletproof swing he had built over 100,000 range balls was now bolted to a spine that could give out at any moment. And here is the detail that tells you exactly who Lee Trevino was. He turned even that into a joke. After surviving a near-fatal lightning strike, Trevino delivered the most famous line of his entire life. He said that if you're ever caught on a golf course in a thunderstorm, you should hold a 1-iron up toward the sky, because not even God can hit a 1-iron. That's a man who looked death in the face and got a laugh out of it. Even broken, he wasn't finished. In 1984, at 44 years old, with a surgically repaired back, Lee Trevino won the PGA Championship at Shoal Creek, leading wire to wire. 6 majors now. A man who started in a hayfield with no shoes had stood at the very top of the sport across 3 different decades. And when he aged out of the regular tour, he simply did it all over again. On the senior circuit, he was utterly dominant, piling up nearly 30 wins and millions of dollars, including a U.S. Senior Open title, and proving that the swing he'd built as a starving teenager was the most durable engine the game had ever produced. The textbook was wrong about him for 40 straight years. What made all of it land even harder is that Trevino did it as an outsider in every possible sense. He was a Mexican-American in a sport that in the 1960s was about as exclusive and closed off as any in the country. He had no pedigree, no sponsor, no connections, and no polish. The golf establishment expected him to be intimidated. Instead, he walked into their clubhouses, cracking jokes, won their biggest trophies, and became, for millions of people who had never seen themselves represented in the game, living proof that the door could be kicked open by anyone willing to hit enough golf balls. He carried the weight of being a symbol and never once let it slow his hands. And the people best positioned to judge him, the players who had to stand on the same tee and try to beat him, never stopped marveling at the ball striking. In an era stacked with Nicklaus, Player, and a young Tom Watson, it was Trevino's control in the wind, his ability to flight the ball to any height on command, and land it like he was setting it down by hand, that left the deepest impression. They didn't admire his swing because it was pretty. They admired it because it never, ever lied to him. So why will there never be another Lee Trevino? Because the conditions that forged him no longer exist. Today's great players are identified at 6 years old, coached by teams of specialists, swing-modeled on launch monitors, and carefully protected from ever developing a flaw. They are manufactured. Trevino was forged. Nobody taught him to fade the ball away from trouble. Poverty taught him. Nobody gave him nerves of steel. Tennyson Park gambling debts gave him. Nobody handed him a personality that could disarm Jack Nicklaus on a playoff tee. Survival gave him that. You cannot recreate a man whose entire game was the answer to a question that today's juniors never have to ask: what happens to me if I lose this shot? For Trevino, the answer used to be that he didn't eat. That fear never left him, and it turned him into one of the greatest ball strikers and one of the toughest competitors the sport has ever seen. He didn't have the prettiest swing, he didn't have the best equipment, the right background, or the textbook fundamentals. He had a fence, a fade, and a refusal to lose. There will never be another Lee Trevino. The world that made him is gone. If this is the kind of story you're here for, drop a comment with the next golfer you want covered, and stick around because there are more legends like this one on the way.